Please keep referring to the emergency exits, which are both sides of the room or in the doors at the back that you came through. The meeting will be recorded and then uploaded onto YouTube following the meeting. Therefore, any members of the public present should be aware that you may be recorded even if you are not participating in the meeting. And if this causes any concern, please let one of us know. I ask that you switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting. Planning applications will be heard in order of the presentation, and the chair will announce the agenda number. The planning officer will introduce the application. We will then call on public speakers. We'll then ask the members and officers for any points of clarification. We will then ask any member who has technical queries. The committee will then discuss and debate before seeking a further clarification and then making a decision on the application. So we start today's meeting with apologies for absence. I believe the apologies are Councillor Mike Bess and Councillor Mrs. Jenny Kenton. And we move on to the minutes from the previous meeting. Are members happy and have had a chance to read the minutes from the previous meeting? Are there any comments, or are you happy for me to sign the minutes to go through them? Three sets. Excellent. Okay, I will sign those instead. We have no members or any declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest that are not on the register that they need to make us aware of? No. There's no one registered to speak in public question time, so we move straight on to agenda item 5, which is the planning application 25/00734 Mapperton Dairy Unit, Mapperton. Eric.
Hopefully the mic's working. Can everyone hear me okay? Anyone hear that? Is that good? No?
Yeah, a bit closer.
Bit closer?
No, it's not the microphone.
Great. Is that better? Yeah, great. This is my first time at committee since I joined last year, so I'll just introduce myself. I'm Aaron Balkier, Senior Planner in the South team. So yeah, it's like, so this is an application at Mapperton Dairy Unit in the village of Mapperton. It's for the demolition of all the existing agricultural barns on the site and the erection of 4 dwellings. Yeah. So this is the overview where Mapperton is. Because you may not be aware. So we planted the top right corner, A303 in green, and then the dot that I've drawn is the village of Mapperton, or specifically the dairy unit that we're talking about here. Gives you that context and some site plans zoomed in. So this is the unit outlined in red. This is the location plan. As you see, the main villages to the northeast. This is sort of on the southwest edge of the village. That shows you what kind of built form is on site of land. To the northeast are some residential dwellings. The structures you see in the immediate northeast are garden outbuildings, whereas the dwellings themselves are set further back from the site. And on the site itself, you see these large rectangular blocks. Those are the agricultural barns. And that's a satellite view of the site. This is the proposed site plan. And you see 4 dwellings detached, each with their own access onto a shared access, and then the access to the west. They're arranged in such a way where you've, the 2 main structures are kind of connected by a single-storey connection. Well, I'll show you some plot designs. So plots 1 and 2 are of similar designs, and plots 3 and 4 are again similar designs. So there's kind of 2 main types of designs. Plot 1, as you can see, the intention is sort of to mimic a kind of a barn type design. You've got a mix of stone and timber for materials, and these kind of tall glass windows. The other elevation for plot 1. Then plot 2 is very similar, so we come back to these if councils want. And then plot 3 is of a larger scale. As you can see, it's 2-storey elements again connected by a 6-storey element. Again, similarly, all 4 plots are a combination of stone and timber, one with stone walls. The top floors is very similar. During the course of the application, there were a few amendments I just want to briefly talk about before I get into the main part of the presentation. First of all, there was a flood risk assessment that was submitted. And these included some plans showing the site overlaid with the flood zone to understand the impacts. A biodiversity net gain statement is quite a simple statement, just a local one that we require on the validation list, which repeats much of what was in the B&G assessments. Some elevation plans were submitted revised. These made a quite simple change just to include more natural stone on some of the elevations for plot 3. And this, just a few days before this committee, I think the agent indicated to me that they would be willing for council to consider it necessary to support these 2 changes in the bottom there. The use of terracotta clay tiles, a condition to use low transmission glass to reduce light spill and surface elevations. I've reviewed that last bit in response to some comments about light pollution. So our recommendation on this one was that the presentation will continue. Obviously, the overall recommendation is to grant subject to completion of a Section 106 legal agreement and the planning conditions. And therefore, because we need the legal agreement and this hasn't been completed, therefore, the committee are minded to go with that recommendation. We'd have to delegate the final decision to the planning in that regard. So on this, the legal agreement, it would be for the B&G on site, so biodiversity net gain, which is now a statutory requirement. And this would be to require the submission and approval of a habitat management and monitoring plan, which is sort of the standard B&G habitat plan that required. So the key considerations on the application are as follows. I'll go through them each with lots of pictures to assist with the report, because I take the report read hopefully by members. Principle. Forgive all the text, but I'll go through it quickly. First starting point is that the application site is in a unstable location on the edge of a small village with few services. That ordinarily this would not be an appropriate place for new residential development. In this case, there is a fallback position established by, I won't read that reference, but it's essentially a Class 2 fallback position, which is a type of permitted development right for the conversion of agricultural buildings into dwellings. And in this case, they achieved consent for that to convert one of the agricultural barns on the site into 4 dwellings. There's a proposal here is to demolish those, but not only the barn with the permission, but also the other adjacent barns on the site, and then to erect 4 detached dwellings. A quick word on the tilt balance, which members would be well aware of. In this case, our view is that the tilt balance wouldn't apply, and so that's on the basis that the policy of most relevance for the determination of the application is EQ2, which is we consider to still be in date. Most of the tilt balance refers to the out-of-date policy SS2, which is in regards to steering new residential development, but in this case, because of the fallback position.
Sorry, I turned it off.
But because of the fallback position, and therefore the principle of residential development on the site already being established, SS2 is not of primary relevance in the determination of the application, and therefore the fact it's out of date does not necessarily mean to apply the plans as applied. So in our view, the members should decide the application in accordance with the general statutory requirement, which is in accordance with the development plan, unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. So as I said at the beginning there, I think that significant material consideration is the fact that we've got this fallback position. So although we wouldn't ordinarily consider the site appropriate, we do in this case because of that. So in terms of the fallback to the plan showing the existing barns on the site, as you can see, there's it separated them out into floor space area. Barn that has the position for the fallback position is the one in the west, and the others don't. However, all of the barns are proposed for demolition. Under the fallback position, this is the site plan that was approved. The other barns would remain, meaning that they remain agricultural use. Oftentimes, it's considered a bit of an issue because it's not ideal to have residential development so close to existing agricultural development. As you can see, farm 2 there, you see the numbers of plots, there's four units. This is what the fallback position would have looked like. So this is, I think, relevant to discuss because this is what relevant to consider whether this proposal here is a betterment over the scheme that was consented already. So, but in this case, it was, I'll just go back to that. So there was 3 2-bedroom dwellings and 1 5-bedroom dwelling. This was granted in June 2023. And these are the other renovations. One major issue in this application that was, I know it's discussed with the flood risk assessment that was submitted, is the flood risk and drainage issues. So as I'll show from some photographs in a minute, there's a watercourse that goes along the southern boundary of the site. And according to the latest Environment Agency mapping, this has the potential to flood. A word of warning about that mapping is obviously quite uncertain in that the mapping covers the whole country and the Environment Agency can't be sure with 100% certainty about which areas flood and which ones don't. However, the mapping is sort of used as a guide for planners and for decision makers. So the LFA, or the local flood risk authority, commented on the application and objected to the scheme. They're statutory consultee for major applications, but not for minor schemes such as this. However, at the request of the case officer, they did review the submissions and make their comments. And then later, as I'll discuss, also assisted with drafting of conditions as well. In their view, there's insufficient information to determine whether the dwellings will be safe for their lifetime and not increase flood risk elsewhere. Next slide. The local, well, I think local one policy on flood risk is more simple, but the national policy on flood risk is quite complicated, so it might be worth me just explaining it a little bit. The NPPF has what they call a sequential test, and this has been quite complicated, subject to a lot of debate and case law and evolving practice, including changes that were made a couple months ago or weeks ago, I should say. So the idea, the purpose of the sequential test is to direct new residential development towards areas of the lowest flood risk. In the paragraph 175 of the NPPF, kind of explains how that should be conducted. Because of the different practice across the country, I think the planning practice guidance, which I'll just quickly note is in case law has been given the same weight as the NPPF in terms of it being material consideration, was amended a few weeks ago to say that in applying paragraph 175, i.e. the sequential test, a proportionate approach should be taken. The sequential test does apply even to applications with fallback positions. So say, for example, we've got a house and someone wants to demolish the house and build another house, the sequential test would still apply, and therefore, even though they've got permission on this site for 4 dwellings already, it's our view that the sequential test would still need to be satisfied in this case according to national policy. This is a site plan. I'm just going to show you an image now after this, showing the overlay of this site, the proposed site plan here, with the fallback position, to show you how the areas that are at risk of flooding overlap. So as you can see, the areas that are shaded blue show the areas that, according to the Environment Agency mapping, are liable to flood. The area in red is the fallback barn that has the permission for 4 dwellings. And then the areas in, I don't know if you can see that, but in green are the built form of the dwelling proposed here. So there's a few differences. So one obvious one is that there's 4 dwellings in the area at risk under the fallback position, and there's only 3 dwellings in that area under this proposal. The applicant has compared the floor space that's at risk from flooding in this application compared to the one in the fallback, and the one in the fallback is slightly higher, although very marginally so. I just want to emphasise that this has no bearing on whether the sequential test applies or not. So our view, as is explained in the officer report, is that the sequential test does apply, and that none has been submitted. We usually require the applicant to submit evidence of how they considered alternative sites. In this case, because the village of Mapleton has quite low flooding overall, and this is one of the few areas that is likely to flood. And so I think we're confident enough to say that if a sequential test was undertaken, that it would likely fail. That I would emphasise none has been submitted. Our view is that because the fallback position here is concerning in that you've got more dwellings in the area at risk, and you've got more floor space in the area at risk, and closer to the watercourse overall, and also without the flood mitigation measures, which I'll discuss at the moment, that outweighs the failure in the proposal of that national policy. Maybe just a very quick point on practice and the sequential test. I think in recent years there's been quite a few appeal decisions where inspectors have taken the view that the failure of the sequential test is not final, as in doesn't necessitate refusal of the application, and there's been case law confirming that, and therefore it must be weighed in the plan balance, including any material considerations, including fallback positions. So in that case I discussed earlier, where you've got a house someone wants to demolish and build a new house on, but it's in a flood risk area and they haven't done a sequential test. That is still a very strong material consideration that could outweigh the failure to do that sequential test. Just to always explain that. So this picture here is one of the pictures on the site visit of the watercourse in question. As you can see, this is taken a few weeks ago. It's quite a small watercourse. This is on the side. There was some evidence of drainage issues on the site. There was like a puddle near one of the site boundary, so it is plausible that it could flood. But as I said, there's a lot of uncertainty over that. I think it's not definitive. As I say, there's the material considerations for this proposal being a net improvement in terms of flood risk compared with the Class View permission, which the applicant could go ahead and implement. In terms of the floor layouts, the Class View permission is restricted in terms of what it can do. So, for example, it has to essentially give a conversion of the existing barn. It can't rebuild it or build it higher than what it is at the moment. Whereas under this proposal, the levels can be adjusted and other changes made, that there would be an improvement to make residents safer and the property itself safer, which isn't possible under the fallback position. So as I said at the end there, it's a low wage should be placed on policy non-compliance with the application, including the failure of the sequential tests. That's national policy. And then we've got a local policy on flood risk and drainage, which reads: development should reduce the impact of flood risk by incorporating sustainable drainage systems and through appropriate layout, design, and choice of materials. In this case, I think that policy should be read in connection with an improvement in terms of flood risk compared to fallback. The applicant's explanations for flood risk mitigation, which I'll again go on to in a moment. And so therefore our view is that the proposal, although it would be contrary to national policy, would be complying with local policy EQ1 in that regard on flood risk. On the conditions, there's a condition recommended about surface water drainage, which was drafted in consultation with the LFA, notwithstanding their technical objection. And this kind of secures the flood risk mitigation measures that can discussed. So these include the following: finished floor levels of each dwelling elevated at least 0.3 meters above the designed surface water flood level. More elevations, and then the footpath as well, as in to ensure that people can leave the dwelling in the event of a flood. And the access road itself is outside the flood risk zone, so I think there wouldn't be issues with residents leaving the site. I'll move on to design and character. Main policy in this regard is EQ2 in the local plan, and the NPPF is obviously important paragraphs in relation to design, which are outlined in the report. Overall, I consider the site to be relatively contained. As you see in a moment from some of the photographs, the site effectively surrounded by trees and hedgerows, and it's lower down than the village that's higher up to the northeast. The landscape opens up quite significantly to the south and west, where you've got this open rolling countryside. The site itself is more contained. as we've seen from the plot designs earlier, the plots 3 and 4 are of this more significant scale compared to plots 1 and 2. I think this should be considered that the existing barn structures in terms of scale should be considered, because I think when compared with what's on the site at the moment, and again we'll see some photographs of that, I think the scale is not as concerned as it might be in a more different location. So for example, if those plots 3 and 4 are in a more sensitive location without that screening and without that existing bulky barn structures, then there could be some concerns, but I think it has to be read in context. Then we'll go through those photos. Just a quick one as well, that these designs are proposed here have been proposed elsewhere, including a few miles away from the application sites. I've given some examples there where we have considered that similar designs were acceptable. I'll go through some of those designs as well, which are helpful, because then you can actually see what it looks like as it's built, which is not with pencil always. So this is what an example of what's on the site at the moment. When we were doing the site visit, it was clear the site largely not in use. I think intermittent use, but it's clearly not being used as much as it used to be. These are obviously very large structures. This is what it looks like from inside. This photograph here is taken from the northeast corner of the site, so slightly higher up. And so on the other side of that hedgerow there, with the tree belt, there is the garden of the dwellings I was discussing at the beginning. We can go back to this if members have any questions or confusion or anything. So this photograph here, I'm very lucky on the day, very good weather, is looking northwards or northeast from the kind of open countryside I was talking about. So the site itself is on the outside of those trees. So you can barely see the actual barns themselves, but so I think that gives an example of how contained site is. And just to be clear, the ditch that I showed earlier, we'll just go back in a moment. Yeah, the ditch that I showed earlier is immediately in front of those trees. You can't see it from here, but that's where the southern boundary. There's also a footpath that goes along that boundary. You can kind of see the outline of where people could trodden on if you can squint, but that's a footpath. The footpath does not go through the site itself; it just goes around the edge of it. So this is some examples of the same design in the local area. This one was taken, I think, about 2 miles away from the site. I think it took 5 minutes to drive to it from the application site. I would caution members not to give too much weight to this, because obviously the design's different and everything, but it will just be helpful to members to see what it looks like. There's another design from slightly further away. This would probably be more like plots 1 and 2. This one, I think it's Blackford, about a mile, maybe a mile to westward as well on the site. So, and then I'll move on to housing mix. So I think there were some comments made about the fact that the proposal was for 5-bedroom dwellings. It'd be more appropriate to have a mix of bedrooms. So the policy in that regard is HG5, the local plan. I think so the class 2 fallback had 1 5-bedroom dwelling and 3 2-bedroom dwellings. So the 3 2-bedroom dwellings are essentially supposed to become 5-bedroom dwellings. In terms of what the need for bedroom sizes is, there's a South Somerset and Somerset West and Taunton Council local needs assessment that was undertaken relatively recently in 2022. So these figures here are for market housing. Obviously, this case can't acquire affordable housing or social housing. In this case, it's below 10 dwellings. That's a national policy. As you can see there, by far the most big need is for 3-bedroom dwellings. Interestingly, the need for 4+ bedroom dwellings is actually greater than 2-bedroom dwellings. So our view is that the increase from 2-bedroom dwellings to 5-bedroom dwellings, if not acceptable, it could likely meet a slightly greater need than any support for that assessment. So therefore, we argue that it's not contrary to policy HG5, although it's accepted that in general it's always better to have a mix of bedrooms numbers for to create more balanced communities. On highways and construction traffic. We've got some policies in the local plan in that regard, TA1, TA5, TA6, these are outlined in the local plan, so that's for that. So each dwelling will have their own parking turning area, insufficient parking. Existing access will be used, so probably but visibility on the access is already sufficient, and heavy vehicles regularly go in and out of it. So there's no issue in that regard. No objection from the highways officer, subject to conditions. And we'd recommend a condition here about the structured traffic management plan. I know there was some comments made about the desirability of routing construction traffic in certain ways, and that can be assessed when the applicant is discharging that pre-commencement condition, rather than in this application necessarily. If members consider it necessary, specify the route readiness in the condition if they're necessary. This is a picture of the access and my whole confusion. You can see that there's silos in the background there, so I guess well, that's located. So maybe go back to the site plan in a moment, but this is from the western boundary, so you're looking eastward now. This is the view northwards, but tilted, looking northwards now. And as you can see, there's full space in the road is for rural roads such as this in the area, but it's be pretty good condition, basically. So this view is looking south, and there's a dead end. I think it's a dead end, or maybe it continues east. I think it does. I think it continues east. Actually, I'll go back to that. So the footpath starts at the end of this road and then goes west. I think the footpath also extends east as well. So as you can see the boundary there, that's where the boundaries, and then when you turn left, that's where the southern boundary is. It's like that we showed, and then that hill where the view of the landscape opens up. So in the overall planning balance, in our view, the proposal should only be if we consider the investment over the fallback position. Because as we say, we wouldn't ordinarily consider residential development in this site to be acceptable because of the isolated location. However, in this case, you have that fallback position. In our view, this in several regards it represents an improvement. So first, the residential amenity for future residents. So in the sense that the barns would be removed, and there'll be more amenity space, garden space, and also flood mitigation measures to make residents and property safer in the event of flood. In our view, the design will also be an improvement compared to the potential of these bulky modern barns relative to the dwellings that are proposed. And third, the overall flood risk would be lower due to the reason we've already explained in terms of the fewer number of dwellings and different mitigation measures, etc. As I say, the proposal would be contrary to national policies on flooding. No special tests have been undertaken. The proposal would likely fail one if one was undertaken, and the LFA has rejected the proposal. We consider low weight should be given to this identified conflict of national policy. We give more significant weight to the material consideration of the fallback, the unmitigated impact of the fallback position. So overall, the recommendations, the plan condition be granted subject to Section 1 State Agreement and the plan conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. So we move on to the public participation section, and I start with Anthony Brown. If you'd like to come to the thing there.
Mind my seat.
You carry on.
Thank you.
You just press the button on the front of the micro when you're ready, and you have three.
Where do I press it?
Just on the top.
Just there. Thank you very much. Chairman, members of the planning committee, I'm very grateful indeed for you allowing me to come along and say a few words this afternoon. My name's Anthony Brown. I and my family have lived in the small settlement of Mapperton now for over 40 years. My neighbour and our local councillor, Graham Bowler, will be saying a few general words about this development, but I want to focus just on one aspect. The very thorough and impressive report you've heard from the planning officer has certainly identified problems relating to the site, which my neighbour will cover. Various of my neighbours submitted comments on the planning application, and they're not able, unfortunately, to be here this afternoon because of other commitments. I've discussed the planning officer's report with them, and I'm permitted to speak on their behalf as well as on my own. Graham Burger will refer to the fact that we're not all convinced the current development plan before your committee is more suitable than the Class Q proposal that it would replace. And that's indeed our collective view. We're all agreed that the applicant's proposal to build 4 substantial, as we've seen from the illustrations, 5-bedroom houses on this site would have a considerably greater detrimental impact on the small rural settlement than the fallback Class Q. The houses that are proposed are large and sited further up the slope, and therefore closer to the conservation area, and are much more prominent visual. Furthermore, their design is clearly not commensurate with the character of the architectural environment of Mapperton settlement, where, without exception, the buildings are built entirely of stone. And I don't think I'd be contradicted if I said that this proposal would expand our small settlement by a greater amount than at any time since the original medieval village was wiped out by the Black Death in the 14th century. The fallback Class Q proposal definitely has its faults, as the planning officer has suggested, but in our collective view, it is preferable. The dwellings are smaller and concentrated in a more compact area. They're situated on the outer edge of the site to the southwest, and are therefore at the bottom of the slope, greatly reducing their visual impact. From the outside, the Class Q buildings.
Mr. Brown, talk to you, that's your.
That's fine. That's what I said all I want to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I please call Noter, sorry if I put it, my bowler side, my eyesight, I've got my glasses today, who I believe is the parish councillor. Can I just check, Mr. Bowler, did I hear the previous speaker say that you were also a neighbour?
Yes, I reside in Mapperton.
So
Yes.
so can I just check, are you coming here to relay the parish council's comment, or are you including some of your own?
No, I'm representing the Northville Parish Council,
Okay,
their views.
okay,
And
thank
we
you.
had a private meeting yesterday evening, which will be reinforced.
Okay, I'm just thinking on your behalf, it's obviously parish council views, because obviously you're a neighbour, so that would put you in a different bracket. I
Yeah,
don't want you to get
Yes.
do any bother. All right, no
okay.
problem. When you're ready, you have 3 minutes.
Is the microphone still on? Okay. Our major concern, two major concerns through all the previous applications for the Class Q applications and so on. Our two major concerns have been the design materials, which Anthony spoke of, but also the flooding, which is not a possibility, it's an actual fact. Today, even beautiful sunshine, there is significant flooding at the site because of the recent rainfall. So it's a real thing. There is flooding there. So Mapperton, Anthony mentioned, very ancient foundation, established more than 1,000 years ago. It's a classic late Saxon hilltop village. The attraction of the early settlers, the abundant supply of water from the natural springs around the hillsides. In periods of heavy rainfall, these contribute to the open flowing streams like today. It's quite excessive, one of which forms the southern boundary of the dairy site, as the author describes and shown in the photographs. With the church and the manor house as a central point, there are at present 18 dwellings in the core of the village. They're distributed around the hillsides at sufficient altitude that there is no incidence of flooding at any of them. Surplus surface water, heavy rainfall, like this period now, flows away easily down the tarmac surfaces of the village's single track lanes. but then it pools into a standing flood adjacent to the dairy site. The closest neighbour dwellings are a minimum of 50 metres away from the dairy site, but they are at significantly higher altitudes. And the archaeological and historical records of the village shows that there has never been any form of human dwelling at the dairy site, because our ancestors had enough common sense not to live at point prone to flooding. Paragraph 2.3 of the report acknowledges that the proposal would be contrary to national planning policies on flooding, that no sequential test has been undertaken, and that the proposal would likely have failed to pass had a test been made, and that the lead local flood authority have objected to the proposal. So, in spite of Somerset's own lead local flood authority's objection, the report goes on to suggest that you, the meeting, should ignore these judgments on flooding and approve this application anyway, because not to do so would cause the applicant to revert to the still extant Class Q approval fallback position, which the officer suggests is a less valuable outcome for the community. But on the contrary, the Northfield Council feels that such an attempt to second guess the future motivation of the applicant is not appropriate. And in any case, they are by no means convinced that this current proposal is any more desirable than the applicant's.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Very much. Can I next ask Councillor Nicola Clark, who is the representative of Blackmore Vale?
Thank you so much for taking the time to hear this application today. I'm speaking today on behalf of myself and my divisional colleague, Councillor Hayward Burt, to ask that this committee gives the application very careful consideration in light of the range of concerns raised by local people and consultees. I do recognise that a previous Class Q approval was granted in 2023. However, I think it is important to be clear that what is before us is not the same. The earlier approval allowed the reuse of an existing building, whereas today's proposal demolishes that building and replaces it with something else entirely new. Demolishing buildings and then constructing new homes is very different from replacing what is already there. And that difference, of course, affects issues like flood risk, design and construction impact. Officers acknowledge in their report that this proposal conflicts with national flood policy, that a sequential test has not been carried out, and that the lead local flood authority continues to object. There is grave concern over the uncertainty about how floodwater would behave on and beyond the site, particularly given its proximity to the source of a watercourse and the known flooding history downstream. For this community, flooding is not an abstract policy, and I would ask the committee to consider whether the evidence presented today is sufficient to give long-term confidence that risks are fully understood and managed. These concerns are not just being raised by residents, but also through professional planning representations, as you will have all seen in the letter from Atlas Planning Group dated the 16th of May. Parish councils and residents have also raised concerns that the proposed materials and large areas of glazing do not reflect the traditional buildings nearby and would appear out of place in the landscape. As these are matters of planning judgment, it is important that trained councillors weigh the balance between modern design and local distinctiveness, particularly given the strength of feeling expressed locally. And I will note that the LT glass mentioned earlier does not reduce external glare, only internal glare. Even where development is considered acceptable in principle, the way it is built matters to those who live nearby. Concerns have been raised about construction traffic using the narrow, winding and weight-restricted roads between Mapton and Blackford, including Blackford Hollow, Quarry Hill and Mount Farm Lane. As mentioned, if the committee is minded to approve the application, I would encourage a clear condition requiring construction traffic to access the site only via the normal route to protect road safety and residential amenity. For these reasons, I would ask the committee to take the time to very carefully weigh the issues raised by residents and consultees and to consider whether this proposal before us adequately addresses these concerns in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we move on to Coral Curtis, who is the agent. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members. Thank you for the time to speak today. The application site, as you've heard, has got an extant permission for the conversion of one of the existing barns to 4 dwellings, which establishes the principle of development. As part of the Class Q permission, you can only undertake very, very limited works. The fallback position means that we must consider whether the proposed development would be a more sustainable and desirable solution than the one that will be achieved by the Class Q. The officer's report and presentation has set this out in detail, and so I'm just going to bring your attention to a couple of key points. So in terms of surface water flood risk, the proposals would provide an improvement when considered against the Class Q, as the number of dwellings within the high-risk area would drop from 4 to 3 units. The total footprint of the proposed buildings within the high-risk area is less than the total footprint approved by the Class Q. The proposals include the removal of hard standing and the other buildings and allow for significant planting, new gardens, grassland and hedgerows, which will contribute to attenuating surface water. This would not be possible under the Class Q, as the existing hard standings and buildings have to remain in place. Through the removal of all the barns on the site, there would be a 60% reduction in the mass of buildings. This is a significant landscape benefit and a vast improvement on the existing situation and the Class Q. And the proposals provide a characterful development that is sympathetic to the surrounding environment. We've noted comments regarding the design, and as a result, we've amended the proposals to incorporate more stone into the scheme. And as you've heard from the officer, we're willing to make further changes that can be conditioned. Similar proposals have previously been found acceptable by the council within Blackwood, Compton, Portsmouth and the edge of Charlton Hawthorne, which do have certain context, and therefore it would not seem appropriate to refuse the proposals on these grounds to be defended in the near future. Lastly, the new buildings could achieve higher levels of energy efficiency, A-star in APC terms, compared to the existing permission. The result, therefore, if the Class Q is implemented, will be the retention of massive buildings on site that are no longer fit for purpose, and a design, whilst a slight improvement to the existing barn, is not of the highest quality, nor would it provide decent sized garden amenity space. The design of the scheme should not be controversial, as it constitutes a realistic improvement when compared to the development that would be delivered by the extant Class Q. With respect to the sequential test, there have been numerous appeal decisions and High Court judgment, which confirms undoubtedly that the failure of the sequential test does not result in the automatic refusal of the planning permission, but must be weighed in the planning balance with all other material considerations, including the fallback position of the Class Q. We can confirm that the scheme would be safer in flood risk terms compared to the Class Q, and the LNFA have not considered this thoroughly enough, which a planning officer acknowledges. As such, we respectfully request that members support their officer's well thought out recommendation to approve this application today, to avoid an appeal and cost application being lodged to the council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask you to fix the mic?
Yeah.
Of course. Thank you so much. Okay. Do members have any questions on, technical questions for the officer, or any questions about any of the points that have been raised by from public speakers? No, apologies, I didn't see whose hand went up first, so I'm just going to go around the room. Here.
Thank you, Chair. I would admit I'm a little bit confused. When it comes to the tilted balance, we're told it's not to be engaged. First time I've come across that in a residential development. My understanding has been that out-of-date policies, along with the lack of a 5-year land supply, would mean the tilted balance would be in full effect. So I'm a little bit confused as what you mean by that. So a little bit of clarification on that. Do you want to do that one question at a time, or?
Yeah, sure. I accept it's quite confusing. I think it might be helpful if I just read out the relevant paragraph from the TPS, if that's right. This is paragraph 11, B of the NPPF. It reads, where there are no relevant development plan policies, or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date, granting permission unless, and then it's got 2 brackets. One is any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly demonstrably outweigh the benefits, which is kind of the standard tilt balance that we usually apply. And then the other one's about the application of policies in this framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provides a strong reason for refusing the development proposed. So that second one is sort of like it's designed as a backstop. So for example, let's say there's some harm identified that the government, the national government considers really important not to do that harm, but that planning officer might consider overall and balance the benefits still outweigh the harm. That would mean the tilt balance doesn't apply in that case. I know I'm getting very confusing, but if I just go back to that beginning bit, so it says where the policies are most important for determining the application are out of date. So typically when someone's proposing housing, let's say a new field, the policy that we would, in the local plan that we would first look at is policy SS1 and SS2, which are strategic policies for the delivery of housing. And that's sort of a guide about what's an appropriate area for new housing. And in that case, those policies are out of date because we haven't allocated sites in a very long time. And the housing land supply is below 5 years as the government requirement. So therefore, we give less weight to those policies until balance is engaged. In this case, because we've got that fallback position of the 4 dwellings, the principle of housing development on the site isn't, at least on the site itself, it's not up for debate as such, as in and therefore the policy of most importance to determine the application in that case, in our view, is not policy SS1 or SS2, but in this case, policy EQ2, which is about kind of the design and other aspects of development, ensuring a good, sustainable development. Whereas the principle of it, as I say, policy SS1 and SS2 has already been established. Hopefully that answers your question. Sorry if it's confusing. It's quite confusing the way the national government has worded it.
I have to say, I am still very confused by this. I don't understand why this is the case with this particular development, whereas this is not, our policies have been out of date for a long time. Yeah, so why is this the first time that we're hearing you've got to lay the tilt balance to one side? I don't understand that. Do you want to go on to my second question? So my second question is effectively whether we're saying that Class Q is not being used as devised, but rather as a method of obtaining permission when otherwise it would not be granted. I'm worried by this, and I'm worried. I wonder how many Class Qs are actually getting built out, or are they just being used as a backstop position to leverage a development that otherwise wouldn't happen? I'm very concerned with it. Chair.
Yeah. Tim, whilst I could possibly share your views, it's not actually relevant to this specific application. Is there any other question?
Specific question about Class Q.
Yeah, and I'm more than happy for you to ask that question of the officer outside the meeting about Class Qs in general. But do you have any more questions that are specific to this application? Or do you want to reword that so that it's specific to this?
I'll look at
I'll come back. Case question.
Yes, we recently had a similar application in Devonton where Class Q, the advantages of an application over an original Class Q application, which we turned down. I don't know how much, I want to know how much weight should we on precedent, the fact that we actually had a very similar case, very similar case, the argument for improved insulation, etc., of the new buildings over trying to do a direct Class Q. And we actually refused that one. So I don't know how much precedent we got in the fact that we've actually refused a very similar application in the past, in the near past.
Thank you, Councillor. And every application is viewed in its own merits as always, but you should ensure that we try to keep consistency. I think the comparison generally is between the fallback position and what is in front of you, and as to whether the improvement is appropriate or not.
Yes, because I believe we were advised not to consider the weight of the fallback position when determining the application in its own right. The fact that there was an extant Class Q permission there, we should be considering the application as itself, and not add any weight to it by having extant Class Q of the previous one. Thanks.
So the material consideration is whether what we're seeing is a betterment over the fallback position. the existing, existing extant profession is a material consideration. I'd be welcome, an opportunity to have a discussion about precisely which application we were talking about after the meeting. But that sounds unusual circumstances to me.
Can I just ask the microphone at the very end to be switched off and just pick up a little bit? Councillor Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, I think the one that was being referred to there, Phil, on the committee didn't believe that there was an established precedent because it didn't believe that the original was deliverable. I think that was the issue. However, I want to just ask a couple of questions on precedent and whether they form part of the officer's recommendation. At the time of writing the report, were you familiar with the case of East Lindsey, where replacement of a barn with 2 dwellings in a flood zone, and the inspector ruled that while Class Q established the principle of living on the site, it is a change of use, and that the replacement dwelling is a new build development, and therefore the sequential test proving that there are no second sites nearby, and I did apply to the new build but not to the conversion, and thus fairly satisfied that test led to dismissal at inspection. Were you, I've got a couple, but that's the first one. Were you familiar with that at the time you made your recommendation?
I wasn't familiar with that exact case, but I think the reasoning I'm aware of, for example, as I've said in my presentation, I'm aware of a case where there was a dwelling, existing dwelling, and they wanted to essentially knock it down and just build a very similar dwelling in the exact same spot. I think there was an inspector that said that required a sequential test. So I think it's, hopefully the Officer Board making it very clear that we consider the sequential test the national policy direction it should have been undertaken in this case. I want to be very clear on that. At the same time, there's also many other appeal decisions where inspectors have acknowledged that a sequential test should have been undertaken and it wasn't, or that one was undertaken and it failed, and have nonetheless gone on to improve development based on various reasons, public benefit of new housing or the material consideration of fallback positions, etc. Such as that example of the case of the house that was proposed for demolition and a new dwelling. Inspector in that case would say, despite failure, it's still material considerations would indicate it's still acceptable. So I had to just quickly say, planning system is obviously quite odd in that way, where even though something would fail for specific policy, it could still be approved. I think that's just the nature of our planning system, where it's quite flexible in terms of allowing for flexibility in situations that are unforeseen, including fallback positions. I'll go back to you.
So sorry, before I move on, Chair, I'll just ask you to clarify that a little bit. It seems like in the Senate that it's the department's position that there should be a sequential test, and that's regular. Almost everything except Class Q is a sequential test, certainly this form. But but you seem to be saying that despite that, you recommend approval of building three houses. Is that, have I understood your advice correctly on that specific point?
Essentially, yes. I'll just make 2 quick points. One is there's the a large number of appeals where that's happened, where even very large sites of hundreds of homes where inspectors have said the sequential test has failed, but they nonetheless say that they go on to approve development. So it's not unusual in that respect. And I'll just make one very quick point, if I may, about the application of sequential test to surface water flooding in particular. So up until I might be slightly off my days, but up until a few years ago, the sequential test was only applied in particular fluvial flooding, so that would be the inside flood zone 2 and 3. But then a few years ago, there was an expansion of that to surface water flooding, and across the country, most planning officers weren't considering surface water flood risk in many years. And so that kind of changed, and that's why there's been this kind of expansion of the use of the sequential tests in many sites, including this one. So if this application come in, this exact same scenario maybe 10 years ago, I don't think we would have required a sequential test at that time because we weren't applying sequential tests to surface water flooding. So I think that's something to bear in mind, and I think that's also part of the reason why the government have recently amended the planning practice guidance on sequential tests to refer to that proportionate approach that I discussed at the very beginning. So I think there were being issues with decision making is taking a very strict line on it. Yeah, sorry, I just thought I'd give that kind of context, but I think it's quite important.
Yeah, this is 2 of 3. Another precedent, this time far more local, in Taunton in 22. Were you familiar at the time of writing the report that we'd had a new bill based on Class Q, which produced a domestication in the countryside? Clearly, the form of the dwellings as they are now includes residential curtilages, whereas previously there was a very utilitarian conversion of a barn. There's now a domestication of the site. Were you familiar with that precedent from Riverfield Barn in July 22?
No, I wasn't, but I accept the reasoning that in this case, the area of residential land proposed is significantly larger than the area of residential land in the Class B fallback. So in fallback, it was just the barn itself and a small area around it, whereas in this case, it's the actual agricultural unit itself, which includes all those other large agricultural barns that were proposed to be retained in the Class B fallback. Hopefully, I made that really clear in the presentation. I don't want to use it.
One last, Chairman, and this goes straight to the Hibbett test. My understanding is that this Class Q has been in existence for a couple of years, maybe 2.5 years. And there's obviously a time limit to Class Q. But we have to establish in our own minds there's a realistic prospect of the Class Q in order to establish the weight to be given to the fallback position. As Hibbett said, if there's no realistic prospect of the Class Q, then we should give it no weight. What's your advice in this particular case of the prospects of this Class Q being built out in this relevant time frame? Sorry, given that we can establish these are in a flood, so the share may not be very marketable properties.
So in one of the slides, it says that the Class B permission was granted in June 2023. So they would have another year or more than a year to implement it, deliver it. Obviously, conversion of an existing barn is a lot easier and quicker to do than to construct the proposing year or two. I'm confident it's deliverable and that we should be giving the weight to that fallback decision in this case. I'll do that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Osborne?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I did have a look because this hasn't exactly the most straightforward planning history in the world. You'll see that there was, on this site, there was a withdrawal, then there was a refusal, which was, I think, a 5-house development. Then there was a refusal for a 4. Then it went forward again as a 4, and this time it succeeded. When you looked at the map you put up, which showed that the whole of the location of barn 1 or barn 2, whichever was going to be converted under the PAMB, was actually in a flood zone. But when I looked at the report, there was virtually no reference to flooding. Well, there was, and you decided, or the officer decided, that it wasn't necessary because it was a PAMB. So I'd like to know why the application got passed in the first place, which has now led us to where we are. So that's my first question.
Councillor Osborne, we're not going to answer that question because if you're talking about history, the application was passed and we can't question that now. So if you want to move on to your second question or rephrase.
Thank you, I do. Again, like Tim, I'll probably have to think about how I would rephrase that one, because it's very clear as to where that is. We are where we are. But why is SS2 in this case, which was a policy which was written to, in its own terms, strictly control development in open countryside, rural areas, and this is open countryside, let's be honest about it. So why do you consider SS2 not relevant in this case?
So my view is that SS2 is a strategic policy for delivery of housing, and that the purpose of the policy is to steer development, new residential development into certain areas. In this case, it obviously specifies that it should be in areas that have, in SS2 case, the key services, which I think I've listed separately in one of the paragraphs. That's what we've been applying that to new residential development. But I think when it comes to applications such as this, which rely on fallback, it will be appropriate. So, for example, this is a hypothetical. Imagine you've got that house that someone's living in, and someone's proposing to demolish that house and want to build another house. Would that SS2 be the policy of most importance for the termination of application, which is the phrasing in the paragraph 11 of the PPA? I think that would be the wrong interpretation of it. I think the most important policy would be either EQ2, which is the policy that we've identified here, or in the countryside, and there's a specific policy we plan for replacement dwellings in the countryside. Yeah.
Still not totally convinced, because I was asking the question, in terms of why it's not relevant when it was developed there. Why was the choice taken not to do a sequential test or do any sort of modelling as to, because this proposal is proposing to raise floor level as a way of dealing with the potential flooding problem on this site. But why has there been no sequential test done, and why has there been no modelling done to show what could possibly happen to water behaviour if those floor levels were raised? Where would that water that isn't flowing over there, where would it flow, and what impact would it have downstream? Whilst we don't expect applicants to improve situations, we certainly don't expect them to potentially make it worse. So why are we not asking that there is demonstrable proof that this application will not cause harm further downstream?
So I'm being advised that's more a question for the applicant rather than the planning officer.
Well, planning officer was the one that had to ask for the information, so why didn't the officer not ask for the information?
I believe it's already that the question's being covered. I'll leave you to ponder on that one for a minute. Councillor Ware. Councillor Stanton.
Mine's on the flood risk. As I've understood it from reading the papers and the planning officer presentation, this is on floodplain, but it's in zone 1 as determined by the Environment Agency. The Lead Level Flood Authority objected and objects, but also recommends floor levels. I think it was 0.3 of a metre above the expected flood level. I don't quite understand how all that fits together. So what actually is your assessment of the flood risk? I think it's 2 or 3 of the properties at the bottom end of the slope.
To reiterate, and I think I don't think anyone would disagree with this, that it's always better to site new dwellings outside of any areas of risk of flooding. And obviously, they are coming out from that perspective. I fully understand what is their position. Based on the flood mitigation measures, including the raised floor levels, our position is that represents a betterment of the class 3 fallback, in that if the class 3 fallback were implemented, you'd have dwellings that would have be at more risk. The LFA, in terms of like the procedure side of it, the LFA objectives, the case officer had discussions with LFA about the application, and when we as a planning officers decided to recommend approval of the application on the basis of that fallback position, taking everything into account, we went back to the LFA and requested their input into the drafting of the conditions, and referring to conditions 8 and 9 in the back of the report. Those were collaboration. I just want to repeat that the LFA still maintaining their objection on the basis that for further information, I think they're trying to get their wording up. There is insufficient information to determine whether dwellings will be safe for their lifetimes and not increase flood risk elsewhere. That statement is equally true for the class 3 fallback. I think that the LFA would accept that. I think in this case, because the applicant has obviously a vested interest in ensuring that these properties don't flood, and that they're selling properties to future residents that are not at substantial risk, that that clearly they consider that these dwellings would still be marketable. And so I'm confident that with the conditions imposed, that this scheme would be a betterment over the fallback. That doesn't mean that I'm happy with the situation. I think everyone would agree that dwellings should not be cited in flood zones. In this case, it's in flood zone 1, it should be into the surface water flooding, which is a separate type of mapping that's within the high risk area of that. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Yes, Page.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether the officer can answer this, but given these risks of flooding in the flood zone, would these people be able to secure house insurance?
That's not really a material question.
No, no.
And as the planning officer isn't in the insurance group, it's probably not really a question for him either.
Okay.
Did you have anything else you wanted to?
No, but it obviously would affect the purchasers if they couldn't insure their homes. Thank you.
Thanks for clearing. Thank you. Come back to you.
I can't turn it into a question, so I'll save it for debate, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Thank you, Chair. Whether it's planned or not, I'm going to ask the questions. The agent said about digging up all the road, the foundations and all this, making way for softer area to absorb water and all that. However, if I mention the word contamination, do you have an answer for that? Would any of this be a contaminated waste?
Obviously, the existing agricultural unit, typically we don't impose a condition requiring, for example, a contamination assessment before carrying out any works, unless there's evidence of some sort of, like, let's say, a large slurry store on site, something like that. I think there's always the risk. I think there's other regulations, building control, and obviously, their own interest in keeping their workers safe and do that. I think the planning system obviously can consider those issues, but I think it's not essential that all development has to be, because it could happen on any side that they can find some contaminated material while they start digging. Doesn't mean we put that restrictions on conditions, but yes, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. In this environment right now, I notice on your drawings, there's no renewables on those roofs or anything. Does that mean anything?
I think it's actually by solar panels. There's no requirement in for optical new dwellings to have solar panels, and I think if you could consider whether it's necessary, I think this, for example, would be conditioned that would be necessary. It meet tests and plan conditions, and I would also say that there's mid-development rights, so that future occupiers would be free to put solar panels on if they wish to. And obviously, I think the developer could also come forward at a later stage with an application if they wanted to do that.
Okay, I had to ask Sam really. The footpath surrounding the site, is that a right of way?
Yes.
You mentioned about the housing then. You mentioned about housing need in Somerset. I saw all the numbers and all that. We're all aware of that, but surely that's for social housing, not these new big builds.
So the figures, the figures were only for market housing, and there were separate figures for non-market housing, social housing, and then also combined figures for actually separated to market housing, which is what's proposed here. And we obviously, as I said, we're not allowed to, but due to national policy, to require any affordable housing. So as you see, then the vast majority of the need is for 3 bedrooms, and then following that, 4+ bedrooms, and then 2 bedrooms, and then at the end, 1 bedrooms.
And my last question is,
Can you just pop your microphone on?
is that on?
Yeah.
If this construction goes ahead, the construction traffic, this is ex-farmland and all that, but tearing all that concrete up and all this is going to be maybe not quite muddy. Are the traffic going to have any conditions in saying that they need site they've got to start cleaning their wheels and all that, rather than, contaminate mud all down the roads with the.
Yes, and not on the site visit, you know, it's quite clear that the roads are quite narrow at times and there's a lot of mud, and I do accept that. On condition 3 of at the end of the report, which requires a submission of a construction traffic management plan, there's I just spotted a typo there, it said the plant shall provide, I'll make it shorter, that's my next one, but the plan shall provide, and then one of the bullet points is, just find it. Method of preventing mud from being carried onto the highway. So, in the procedure for this would be somewhat they would apply to discharge that condition with that plan, with all the details on of the routes and the construction. So there's a further condition 4 on the other aspects of the construction management. So the condition 3 is just on traffic, and there's a list there of various requirements that are due, and then we likely consult the highways officer on that. So the planners and highways officer will review that. Typically, I don't recall we consult the parish necessarily on discharge condition applications from memory, but I think, yeah, we'll also heard what their input and which route they prefer. We'll also consider that.
Thanks, Roy.
Thank you. Yeah, is it the council's position therefore that conditions 8, 9 and 10, I believe, is that? Yeah, 8, 9 and 10 are, even though the local flood authority have said they don't approve of this plan, those conditions are put together with the local flood authority and our authority, and would probably give a better drainage to the site than the current barn conversion would. Is that the position?
Yes, that's my advice. I had a meeting with LFA about this application, and I sent them a proposed list of conditions that they're asking for their input, and they made a few changes and suggestions, and those have been incorporated into those conditions that you refer to. Yeah, our view is that this represents a betterment in terms of flood risk over the fallback position established by the last committee.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Stanton.
Yeah, back on solar panels, I'm afraid, but I've just looked it up and I thought I had a memory of this. The government announced on the 6th of June that they would require all new builds to have solar panels, and that would be incorporated in regulations, which will be issued in the autumn under the Future Home Standard. So has that been issued? And if it hasn't, I mean, are we sitting in a committee where tomorrow or next week we'll suddenly discover that a week later we could have conditioned solar panels?
Okay. Do you know the answer? If not, I'll just check that we'll look that up and we'll move into the debate and we'll get our hands track you as soon as we can.
Well, it's relevant because if, as I read it, I'm right, I'm going to propose we defer this so that at the next meeting we can require solar panels.
Thank you. I'm going to get that looked up. We'll find that out, but I'm going to move this into the debate whilst that's being looked at. So who would like to kick this up on this one? Councillor C.
Yes, Chairman, I'll pick up. I think it's quite clear that we aren't able to rely on the HIBIT to make this go away. So, what we had before is squeezing through on the development rights, which are effectively overriding most of the planning system. And I don't like that. I also in agreement with the officer that sequential test is not something. It's a technical something. You shouldn't really have got here without a sequential test. However, it has. So we've got. I think we've had enough presented to us to be able to work out what the sequential test would have included, and to decide whether or not this application is acceptable. So unfortunately, I think that one fails. I am concerned over the significance of urbanisation of the site. I think this is a very, very different thing from what's on the site at the moment, and it's a very, very different thing from most of the village. I have huge sympathy for the representations made by the parish council about the innkeeping aspects. I think what's happened here is, in some ways, the derivation from class Q is sort of saved the day, in that it's trying to look like agricultural buildings, which are actually not what the rest of the settlement looks like. They look like properly designed stone buildings, it does seem to me this is an odd little corner of the settlement with three houses in it, which is very different from the nature of the site at the moment. So I am currently mindful to recommend refusal on the basis of excessive urbanisation, but noting so that the sequential test hadn't been performed and that the site thus has not had to face most of the normal tests that would find any difference between this and national policy. I don't regard this as a particularly sustainable place. I do regard this as defeating the local plan's intent with the settlement hierarchy. But I think the only thing I can really communicate on is the suburbanisation of the countryside. So,
Thank you, Councillor Curley.
Thank you, Chair. Having just listened to Councillor Seaver, I think he quite eloquently put quite a few of my concerns in place. I just want to, rather than say my original question again, I just think that the logic of this development is better than Class Q is irrefutable. But those arguments Councillor Seaver just made, especially about settlement hierarchy, do have me worried. I'm going to listen to the rest of the debate. I'm decided how I'm going to vote. Chair.
Before I come back to Mike, because he asked a question, just to come across the Troy for the answer to your so.
Thanks. The future homes and building standards, which is what you're being referred to, is actually a building regulations requirement rather than planning. So that'd be there for them to apply as part of the build out.
Do you know when it will be enforced?
I am trying to find that out for you now, but the consultation was taking place from November 23 to March 24. I don't see specifically it coming into force date for this.
The website, government website say this autumn. Well, we're now into winter already. So who knows? Yeah, I just, in the interest of debate, I formed an opposite view to that Peter said, Councillor Seed. The precedent that Councillor Ashton mentioned in Dillington, that's a bad precedent. I mean, that was a very marginal vote. I voted, in fact, to approve that application, which was, like Steve said, similar-ish to this one, although it didn't have the flood considerations. As often happens, I'd much prefer to see a proposal for 6 3-bedroom homes and a 2-bed here, be 1 bedroom more than 5 bedroom homes, more fitting the need of the community, but we can only say yes or no to what is applied for. So on balance, I'm reasonably satisfied on the flood issues, which as people will know, I'm fairly well informed about. These 4 5-bedroom houses will cause 4 families to vacate smaller houses. So it'll improve the housing supply of the county. So I'm minded to support the proposal. So support the officer's recommendation.
Yeah, I have a concern that we have the LLFA saying you're in flood zone, and the mitigation is that you raise the floor height in the house. Is this not going to be a precedent to say that we can ignore flood zone money in the future and just build them higher? I'm not sure the relevance to this case, but I'm worried about the precedent set if this is approved to.
I don't think we are setting precedent, Councillor. This remains an option in relation to any application that's got flood risk involved in it. There's specific reasons why we're looking at this and recommending approval, despite the fact that there's recognisable flood risk. It's not totally resolved by raising floor levels. It remains a factor that we're considering a material reason. On the refusal side, potential refusal side of the balance. But this the specific mitigation
Councillor Stanton.
Just on that specific point, it's perfectly normal to build houses higher when there's flood risk. That Oxfordshire District Council gives permission all the time for houses along the River Thames where I used to live in Henley on Thames. The first example I know of is the Glastonbury Lake Village, which I think was 8,000 years ago.
Okay, councillor Kendall.
Just want to answer a question put forward just now. The answer is yes. In England, most new build homes will require to have solar panels installed as standard, but it's by the year 2027. And the government's future home standard for blah, blah, blah. So there's still 2 years to go, but the point is correct. Are we allowing them to build without them now? And then in 2007, we're going to start suddenly saying, you've got to do it.
I'm guessing the decisions we made today, not, you can't make a decision on what might get said in 2027.
Thank you, Chair. Again, the future home standards that we're talking about in terms of requiring, it's not specifically in relation to solar panels. There's a raft of measures that are being sought to significantly increase the energy efficiency of properties being constructed, and solar panels are potentially part of that. So that is, it's a building regulations issue. And what we don't have is we don't currently have the building regulations in place as of today to say that that is the standard to which all buildings need to be constructed. So really depends on when those come into effect and when construction starts.
Councillor Well.
Yes, rather unusually, here we are being asked to overrule a statutory consultee. Well, it doesn't happen very often, so we have to consider, I believe that is the nub of this actual application. And are we satisfied that the officer's explanation to overlook the flooding authority's advice is sufficient? And that's what I'm trying to decide in my mind. I think actually on this occasion, it may well be, of course, if, as Councillor Singh points out, if the Q application was to be built out, it would be more flood risk than this current application. So perhaps by allowing this application, we are improving the situation. I'm being a suspicious soul, may agree with you on your reasoning behind the length of the Q application. But having said that, looking on what we've got now in front of us, this is definitely an improvement on the Class Q application, which doesn't have the built-up floors and there is more room between the buildings, etc., etc. So I think that is, to me, that's the relevant point. I'm trying to decide which way to go on at the moment.
I just check before moving on with the officers that whilst the LFA, whilst we're going against this statutory advice, they have put in conditions that would mitigate some of that advice.
Yeah.
Correct?
That's right. I want to be careful not to, put words in the LFA's mouth, but yeah, from our discussion, they were satisfied the conditions that I've recommended were the best conditions in the circumstances, but they still maintain an objection in the sense that, if you read that, I think in the report, I don't know what page it is, but in the table with all the consultee responses, I have included their responses for there so people can read it. Might be worth referring to. So it's interesting to note at the end of their responses say when referring to the Class Q approval, this would likely encounter the same issues. So I think there's an admission there that their advice was focused on what's proposed in this application and not necessarily a comprehensive comparison between what's proposed in this application and what they could do in the Class Q necessarily.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chairman. I find it rather interesting that the LFA wrote your conditions or helped you with your conditions, but at the same time is still maintaining an objection. So in your conversation, what reasons did they give you for maintaining their objections? Because usually, it's highly unusual, I don't think I've seen an application where, say, the LFFA or another consultee actually puts conditions in to make something acceptable, but usually withdraw their objections at the same time because it's covered. So in this case, why are the LFFA still maintaining their objection?
So on the page I was talking about, the fair objection, that's had that in their words, that's why they've objected. In terms of the conditions, I sent them an email with a list of conditions that I was reminded to recommend on the application and asked for their input, and then we had a meeting about it. And then the outcome of that meeting and those discussions will be the conditions you see at the end of the form. I'm not putting words in their mouth. They maintain their objection and they do not want to see new dwellings built in floodless areas.
Councillor, thank you, Chair. It's not clear to me if the LFA have actually objected. I wonder if the planning officer could help us with that. It says in their submission, their advice is simply informal. I can't see anywhere they've actually formally objected. I think that's quite an important consideration. Why? I could be wrong. It doesn't.
I think the reference to informal was on the basis that, in their view, they're only a statutory consultee for major applications. So that in their mind, they view that any comments they make on minor applications such as this as, I guess, informal, but obviously it's not particularly informal in that they are the LFA and they have provided comments on a live planning application, so it is formal in that sense. I think, to be fair to them, I think they would characterise their comments as an objection, but I don't want to put words in their mouth. I think it's best if members just read it for themselves. It's only a few paragraphs and make up, obviously I've given my explanation, my recommendation, and if there's any further questions, happy to answer.
Thank you very much for that. In my perception of this, and I'm just one person on committee, the LFA just says we have concerns. I've seen much stronger objections than that, but I think I am very concerned about this. And we've got a site coming up later, which has a similar issue. I don't like having to make this decision, but I think the argument that this debate as it's proceeded, and the presentation we've received from the office, a very good presentation. I think on balance, I would back Councillor Stanton. I think that we ought to approve this planning application today. I'd like to second Councillor Stanton if you propose.
Can I just check with Councillor Stanton? So before I move to come back, Councillor, is there anyone else who wants to make any? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chair. Before you go to the vote, I just took into consideration of when Councillor Nicola Clark was doing her 3 minutes speech. She was saying if we did, put this application forward, I think Councillor Clark mentioned about the North Road for a condition for the transport, for the we create all the mess and everything going through. If we did put that, because I really think it's crucial that we listen to the local board members and also the residents, because they're the ones that are going to be the most affected. So if we did go forward, I would like to put a condition in that we take on what Nicola Clark has just said about the Northern Road going out, which that's the only road that they can use. Thank you.
If we are minded to approve something, is that something that would be possible?
Yes, it'd be helpful if there's a Nicola Clark in it, if you could be, specify, maybe we could get the map up and you could just indicate which route you're considering, and then in the condition, I think it's condition 3, is it? I don't know. We could specify, the plan shall provide for, and then it could say, the routes for construction traffic, including specific consideration for, and then list the route in particular. I think I'd be aware of specifying the route specifically, because there might be some unforeseen reason why that specific route couldn't be done. So I don't want to, but I think if you include that, the actual route in the condition, that would obviously be paying with regard to that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm happy that if we are minded to approve it, that we can do that next slide. Yes, we'll continue, then I'm going to go back to the questions now.
Looking at the drawings, when you pinch and blow it up, there shows quite a substantial house with a big pond in there, which suggests that there is water retention in that area. And just to the east of the bottom of that site, there's a green square patch there. I'm not sure whether that's a water retention pond, a slurry lagoon, or what it is.
If I manage to get the site plan up so we can. What about the solar? But it's all the way back there. It's okay.
One of the first pictures that was up there.
I think it's taking the answer.
That's it. Yeah, if you go back to the previous picture and you pinch it
This one.
and blow it up,
Yeah.
that's it, pinch it and blow it up,
You can't sort of-
you can't sit in there. But on mine,
Schools.
it clearly
Yeah.
shows that
Yeah.
red brick building there to the north of it has a big pond in there. And if you come down to the bottom corner of that site, in the adjoining field there, on my loan up there, it shows some sort of either a slurry lagoon, pond, or something like that with a large border to it.
I think that's a garden feature, and it's, you know, that kind of property is further up the hill, so I imagine it'd be artificially created rather than a natural variation.
It comes across, I mean, it's within a flood zone, it clearly states that. Mapton is quite a small village, and in proportion of the buildings that are there, the agricultural buildings and the other buildings, they look quite substantial. So my concern is this just another case of overdevelopment of a settlement? And within the floodplains of that area. And we keep building on these floodplains and that, and then it puts a strain on resources when these things happen. Sorry, just some observations.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move back to Councillor Stanton.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I'd like to propose that we approve the officer's recommendation. I just want to make 2 points that haven't been made up to now. One is that, as some of us heard this morning at a different meeting, there's a group of people who are never represented at these meetings, but who should be taken into consideration, and they're the people who need houses. I've been criticised at a previous meeting for making this point, but I'll make it again. No, we need houses built, and these houses will release further houses downstream. And the second point, this is a brownfield site, or maybe the government said greyfield. You know, it's a site which has had buildings on it, not very attractive ones for a long time, which are decaying. And it's just the kind of site that needs to be put to good use by building houses on it.
Thank you. Can I just check, Councillor Stanton, if you were happy with the extra condition on the
Yeah.
Councillor Patrick?
Yes, I'm very happy to second Councillor Brandon. I really like the idea that this is a 60% reduction in built mass and footprint. So it comes with, you know, I think it will look better than what's currently there. It's brownfield. I think it's a really good point Councillor Stanton made. I'm very happy to second this, particularly the conditional reduction.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we have a proposal and a second on the table. Can I have a show of hands for all of those in favour of the application?
6. That's Sue's, I can't see. Sorry, I couldn't see.
The 3 on that side.
7.
Those against? 4, 5. Any abstentions? Thank you very much for that. Permission is granted. Okay, thank you very much, members. We move on to the second application, and we've just been somebody else has a bit of time to swap over. We're moving to the second application, which is got the right one and the second application is land and State Street, Tinton O'Leary.
useful position.
Yeah. There you go. So you have that, yeah, so it's, you know, thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's great. There you go.
Leave the group. Is that not you? That's great.
Next thing, if you go to the log into your emails, you know, onto the exchange, yeah, what you've got is all search bar, available, okay, and then you go through it.
Thank you. Right, I didn't need to know.
Okay, thank you very much, members. Which may I hand you over to Ian Willis, application.
Thank you, Chair. This reserved matter of application for the erection of 28 dwellings was approved by this committee in October 2023. It was returned to committee last October as the applicant has since conducted a viability assessment which demonstrated that providing affordable housing is not financially viable. Therefore, the application was returned to committee for its resolution on whether to approve the scheme minus the affordable housing provision. Following the review of the submitted viability appraisal, the committee approved that application subject to a deed variation to the original Section 106 agreement, deleting the requirement to provide affordable housing, include a requirement for a viability assessment at 90% completion to be undertaken, and a new Section 106 legal agreement to secure phosphate mitigation. I will just quickly show on the slide for there's the site that we're referring to, a bit closer up with a aerial shot. And this is the layout as agreed by the committee. Now, at the time the previous application was heard at committee, phosphate mitigation in respect to the Somerset Levels Ramsar site was being secured on reserve matters applications. This is why, when the committee reached their decision last year, it was agreed that this would be secured by way of a further Section 106 agreement. Since then, the Supreme Court has ruled that the Local Planning Authority is no longer entitled to take into account harm arising to the Ramsar site when determining the reserve matters application. The approval outline application was issued on the 28th of April 2017, and no such mitigation was secured if it predates the first notification from Natural England, which advised the Local Planning Authority of their responsibility. Therefore, on the basis of the judgment handed down by the Supreme Court, there is no requirement for the applicant to provide phosphate mitigation and no mechanism for the Local Planning Authority to procure such a provision. So as the decision to secure phosphate mitigation was made by this committee, it is referred back to committee for agreement to simply remove this requirement. Now, the application in front of the committee in 2024 included the removal of the affordable housing requirement on the basis that it made the scheme unviable. As I say, a viability report was submitted, independently reviewed, and it was concluded that the provision of affordable housing would make the scheme unviable. Now, given that there's no longer the requirement to provide phosphate mitigation, the matter regarding viability and the requirement not to provide affordable housing has been brought into question. Now, looking through the review, whilst phosphate costs appeared to have been considered, there were other cost considerations which were set out in the review. So whilst it may be that there is now a phosphate saving, it's likely that over the past 2 years, costs may have increased. So the removal of the affordable housing requirement has been secured by deed variation to the original Section 106 agreement. However, there is an addition to include the requirement for viability review to be undertaken at 90% completion of the development. Once completed, the report again will be independently reviewed, and if it's identified that a provision for affordable housing can be made, then this would still be secured by financial contribution. And the process of securing the contribution towards affordable housing was agreed by the committee in 2024, and it's considered that this mechanism remains appropriate. Therefore, the application in front of you today to remove the requirement to provide phosphate mitigation in light of the Supreme Court ruling, whilst retaining the previously agreed requirement to provide a viability report at 90% completion and take a financial contribution towards affordable housing, if possible. There's no other matters in respect of this application that require any consideration by this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We move on to public participation. There are no members of the public wish to speak on this application. We'll move on to the parish council. And again, I apologize for my glasses. I'm going to be Stephen Creaney.
Thank you, Chairman. Recognising that we've now spent a decade minimising what we're here to talk about, I'm going to reflect a little on history and use my 3 minutes. We're going to begin with a statement. This committee is working with this developer to make sure this application continues to progress despite 10 years worth of Tintnell residents' objections and major digressions from the original approved planning. This was evidenced at the October 22nd, 2024 meeting, where you unanimously approved the ditching of 10 affordable homes out of 28 total on profitability grounds and with no further debate. It was even stated that the developer had invested so much money, it would be a pity for them to lose that. I ask, why is this my problem? So now the developer returns again to this developer-friendly committee to receive formal approval to continue the ditching of the affordable homes, and in addition to confirm the ditching of the phosphate mitigation, which was a scientific nonsense probably at the beginning. Some additional observations. Based on the 2017 outline planning permission, this should have all been completed by 2022. There's been no attempt to start construction. Under normal practice, this will be considered lapsed and reapplication would be mandatory. Since its original rejection by this planning department a decade ago, this plan has not changed. However, much has changed in Tintnell. Traffic has increased along Head Street, a SEND school has been built and a farm equipment storage facility / farm shop created. The playing fields, just around the corner, attract greater than 100 children each weekend. Children are picked up by school buses each morning at the same proposed intersection. Highways need to relook at this situation. The developer's original CIL commitment for playing fields, etc., from 10 years ago is now redundant. We have a completely redeveloped playing field, a resident youth football club, and completely refurbished sport pavilion, which houses our youth club and provides changing facilities for footballers. Over 56 letters of complaint were submitted by Tintnell residents as a measure of how the village feels about this development. The village still feels this way. Quoted in the planning application, etc., was the single letter of support that this development received. However, that letter stated that it would only work if it actually began construction immediately, which was more than 5 years ago.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right.
Can I now please call Councillor John Bailey, who is the ward member?
Consulting committees.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee, for sparing the time. Thank you also to Ian Cousins for the support he given to the board members, both by email and orally. Before my time starts, could I just clarify, because Councillor Kettlestone couldn't be here, but wished to submit something, I've just come directly from Oxford. Could I just clarify whether, in fact, Councillor Hobhouse has had anything from Emily? To read out. Have you had any from Emily to read out? No. Okay, all right. and she hasn't submitted anything in her way. Okay, thank you, right, I'll go on my own sweet way. Thank you very much. Yes, going back to some of the points that have already been made very briefly. This has come about after a committee meeting in October 24 when the affordable houses was struck off. We had councillors talking earlier on this afternoon about the need for both housing in Somerset and for affordable housing. And for the opportunity for the residents member to speak on this. So I'm pleased to have this opportunity. I'd like to make some general comments at the end. Now we're looking at the situation where we move forward and the affordable houses I'd like to bring back into the light. We've lost phosphate mitigation and we had a viability study which is going back, as the planning officer said, some time. The circumstances have changed and I would like to propose that the council company members, so the planning committee, consider the review of the viability case on the basis that phosphate mitigation is no longer applicable, and to look at bringing back the affordable houses. The affordable houses are often used in these sort of developments to attract local people to be interested in their building. And I think that's rightly so, because they're looking for people who have lived and worked in a village who can't find accommodation. And to lose those 10 for a settlement size of Tintnell is very, very important. And I think somewhere between 10 and 0, we should be looking for when it was last discussed. Now, I'm not going back to that, but now we have a situation, say, moving on, the viability case needs looking at again in light of this. And so I'd like to consider that very seriously. I'm fully aware that the 90% situation comes into play. I think, frankly, I don't have a great deal of faith in that. I did ask Ian Collins about this and as to whether there are any cases in Somerset where in fact this has been applied. None. Any UK cases? None have come up to date. There may be some that could be floated out. So I don't have a great deal of hope about that. And those about 90%, none of those will apply to Tintnell, which had to fit or he'd be interested in this on the basis they were getting some affordable housing. Now they're not. So I think the viability study needs looking at again. If we are going to make informed decisions in this committee based on current information, then that's what we should be doing. That's my view, and I think I hope you'll agree with that. And we are at a situation where we need to review that. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you very much for the time. Could I make one other point, which is as a member, a general point, not about the time.
Unfortunately, your time is up now and we wouldn't take general points as a member. We'll only specifically discuss the application. But if you would make a general point, please feel free to email myself or one of the
I've already emailed you, but I haven't had a response. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, but pull it up again because I've not seen it. If you ping it across again, I will definitely look at it tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I just ask for some clarification, Ian? There was a comment made that no cases in Somerset little country. If you don't know that, that's absolutely fine. But I just want to check the accuracy of that statement first.
Yeah, it was a case of I couldn't provide any specific cases by the time that these sort of conditions, legal agreements, we do take place in quite commonplace to put the people in. So I just couldn't provide any specific cases at that time.
Okay, so just want to make it clear to the committee that the comment that was made by the ward member was inaccurate, and you just had the answer there, just so that we have the accurate information available to us. Okay, so I'll move over to Dave Norris, who is the agent. Oh, I forgot this. Yeah, I did.
Good afternoon, members. Just for a quick point concerning the mechanism for the kind of clawback of the viability assessment, these are commonly used across the country. One of the issues that's come up recently in the planning press is they are carried out, but all of these reviews show a downturn. So therefore, the assumptions that were made at the time of the viability assessment have changed. I'm not sure if members are aware of development viability and the issues generally, but over the last 3 years, there's been an increase in build costs of even 25% overall, whereas an average 1% increase in house values. So this is one of the reasons that you are seeing so many issues at the moment with affordability of homes and the delivery of new homes. Just going back over the history of this, originally this site was invested in back in 2017, went to an appeal, the inspector concluded that it was an appropriately good site for development, a really good scheme came in, as you'll see, for reserve matters for 28 homes. The following month or so, then we got the infamous letter from Natural England saying phosphates may apply for this. The council chose to retrospectively attach this to this scheme. The CG Fry case that's come out recently has said the council shouldn't have done that, and they should have approved the scheme. And therefore, we spent the last 5 years not being able to develop the scheme. I know what the gentleman from the parish council said, nobody's moving it forward. The problem was nobody could. There was no solution. If it had been approved when it should have been back then, you have 28 homes and 10 affordable homes as well. That time's gone, I'm afraid. I mean, just to give you an indication of the cost of running a scheme like this, the yearly cost of holding a site, £500,000. You have to borrow the money to be able to buy the site in the first place. You have to pay the architects, the planning consultants, and everybody else every year. You know, you're paying for those with no return at all. So I'm not trying to play with the kind of the violin here, but the viability study that was done last year, 12 months ago, demonstrates it wasn't viable with no affordable housing. But I think the members have seen the viability assessment. Page 30 says even with no affordable housing, it wasn't viable. But the applicant has to do something with the site, to invest a lot of money into it, and he has to move it forward. So just for some summaries I've received from the applicant, so yeah, bill costs up to 25-30% since the council brought in the phosphate rule in, so they've had 5 years of not being able to do anything with this. Interest rates have increased by more than 4% since the original time. The 5-year delay, that's a cost of £100,000 per year for this, all of which is coming off, you have to be able to sell a house or invest anything in this. Also, have to spend £100,000 working on phosphate solutions, which we now don't need. You know, devising systems, devising certs, working with geometry, ecologists, and everybody else. And that's not now needed. So, I guess again, it's a bit of a story of a Woburn, but yeah, one of the reasons that council's housing supply is dipped below 2 years is because of this, because of viability. These homes, if approved, will be delivered beginning next year. You'll have 28 homes, a mixture of sizes for the village, and we're all disappointed it can't deliver affordable. Yeah, I am myself. Big Brown work on behalf of affordable housing providers. But we have a review mechanism which is used across the country, and we're absolutely confident, but unfortunately, we won't see that turn in the market.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so I'll move on to questions for members of clarification on things raised by the public and also the plans. Councillor Ware.
Yes, thank you. Can I just ask the officer, was this application first approved, was still in place, or is it still applicable?
Still liable, yes.
It's still live, right? Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, so I'll move us into the debate. Who would like to start us off? Councillor Steen.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think we've got this question here. We have a Supreme Court ruling which is really clear. And, I think we also, fortunately, had sufficient safeguards thanks to the planner's efforts in the original commission to make sure that it fails reasonably safe. I note the difficulties in the industry. However, it was extremely time hard in playing minor and incredible speaking. Perhaps the builder could employ cheaper planners and we would.
Okay, moving swiftly along, Councillor Kenton.
I'm supposed to second that, Chair.
Okay, before we propose that, I will come back to you, but is anyone else wishes to speak in the debate or first? If not, Councillor Steve, can I come also?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify? If we so desire to try to look again at the issue of the viability of not providing any affordable homes, what would be the process of that? Would we defer and ask more information? Thank you.
I mean, we've got the safeguard in place at 90%, so we will be doing. We've got the safeguarding in place at 90%, so we would do it then as per the previous recommendation of the previous committee. So we would be proposing to do that now.
That's what
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make a point that members will know my love of affordable housing. I'm really disappointed that this site won't deliver any affordable housing. I just think this committee needs to note that. Personally, for me, it's very important that we do deliver affordable housing. And I'm very, very sad that we're in this position. And it's really because of our approach to the phosphate, or rather the approach foisted upon us over many, many years. And if we were just allowed to action to determine, this application 5 years ago, Somerset would have 10 extra affordable houses today. And I think that's worth marking on the record, that this is a position this is out of our control. And I would much prefer that we took a different route, but we are where we are. And so I therefore agree, we have no discretion, the Supreme Court's made its mind up, CG Brine, and we have to approve, well, I'm going to be voting for approval. Thank you.
Okay, if no one else wishes to comment, I will go back to councillor Seat.
With the opposite recommendation.
Thank you, councillor Kendall.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Can I have a show of hands for all those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ian, for the presentation. Okay, once we do a quick swap back over and we can invite Aaron back. My apologies, Aaron, for not getting them in the right order there. I'm sure you love spending time with us, which is why you want to be here to the end. We'll ask you to confirm that one. So our next application is the Polymore in Ewing one.
Thank you.
I'll just give Aaron 20 minutes.
Thank you.
While Aaron's getting ready, I'll give us 3 minutes just to do it. That's 3 minutes.
All right.
Thanks, Chair.
So this application is for the erection of a 4-bedroom dwelling on land within the boundaries of the Podmore Inn in the village of Podmore. This is the site plan, so it's been loaded in a well. They're really bad load.
Yeah.
So the building in the middle of the red square is the inn, and the dwelling is proposed between the inn and the dwelling to the immediate east, as you can see on the plans labelled the gables. You're probably all familiar with Podmore, but it's just immediately south of the A303. Sorry about the delay. So it's on the main road. As you can see there, cuts through the village. The village is relatively small. Got a delay, it's horrendous. Sorry. This is the area of stock review. As you see, the parking areas are directly in front of the pub and the west of the pub, and then to the north and east is the beer garden areas. And there's some more zoomed out view. This is from the road. So if you see where the bus stop is, the stone bus stop, bus shelter, I should say, bus stop. The dwelling would be behind that, between the inn and the existing dwelling that you can see there. As you see, in front of the inn, there's these parking spaces that we'll come on to later. Roughly, the northernmost 3/4 of the parking spaces along there are on the land of the inn, owned by the inn, and then roughly the bottom quarter are owned by, or in the highway land. So we'll go on to that later. This is the proposed site plan. This was amended during the course of the application. So originally the garden extended further north, where you see the playground. That was originally part of the garden of the plot. In addition, the house itself was sited further forward, closer to the main road. And yeah, following concerns from the case officer, they severely amended the plans showing the dwelling setback slightly more in line with the building line. As you can see, there's that dashed line, and also retaining the playground to above. There's some trees on site, as you can see there. So the application was accompanied by agricultural documents, and the tree officer assessed them and had no objections. There is a palm tree, I believe, that will be relocated. Is located. I think you can see it in those kind of squiggly red lines. This is a view of the site from the ground, where you can see it slightly rises up, so it's raised from the road. So they can step up to the dwelling. That gives you what the idea of what the boundary of the existing dwelling looks like. There's no windows on the existing dwelling that face into the site. This would be the cross section from the little street view you see. As you can see, the height is in line with the existing development. It's been, it's positioned in a sort of way that is acceptable on street scene. And you can see in the elevations, the materials will be stone. It's sort of that's in the amendments, and then wants to be moving the house slightly further northwards and removing some of the garden. A flood risk assessment was also submitted towards the end of the application. Although the club itself is not in any flood zone or in any areas at risk, the parking space is, so I'll explain that later on. And again, the planning question again statement was submitted as well, which is more like a summary that we use to condition and the condition at the end of the recommendations of planning division be granted subject to the state planning conditions, so there's no legal agreement necessary in this case. The key considerations are the principle, the impact on the pub, flood risk and drainage, and finally design. Obviously, there's other issues that are discussed in the report, but these are the ones that are most relevant for bringing to attention of the committee. In terms of principle of development, the main policy of relevance is policy SS2, which book steer development towards settlements with key settlements. In this case, Pottermore has a church and a pub, and there's other applications in the area in which we considered that it complies with policy SS2. Obviously, tilt balance in this case would apply because the policy SS2 is actually dated to our housing land supply. So the principal development is accepted on this site, and members are reminded that on other applications in the village, that's position we've taken in that regard, that the problem for this purpose is a sustainable location, or sufficiently sustainable to say. It's because it's accepted, as it says in the officer report, that residents will naturally still be heavily reliant on private vehicles. In terms of the impact on the pub, there's a principle known as the agent of change principle, which puts the onus on applicants to ensure that their proposed development does not jeopardise other uses nearby. So, for example, if they have a nightclub and someone wants to build housing around the nightclub, then that would jeopardise the use of that facility because people could complain and shut it down. That would be, I think the agent of change principle would apply. So in this case, there were concerns raised that the dwelling in this location could jeopardise the use of the pub for activities. So in this case, that can submit a detailed noise impact assessment, which is demonstrated that subject to the mitigation measures outlined within it, which include acoustic fencing and kind of internal measures on windows and heating to ensure that there would be less risk of noise entering the dwelling. The unacceptable impact wouldn't be unacceptable on the immunity of residents. So the reason why this is important is that with that assurance and confidence, we can have the confidence that the future residents would not be likely to be submitting complaints that could jeopardise the use of the pub, potentially shutting down from environmental, health point of view. I think it's quite unlikely. I think it's quite the bar's pretty high for that sort of thing, and the activities in the pub are generally suitable in residential areas. There are many settlements in Somerset in which there's properties adjacent to pubs. In terms of the loss of the beer garden, as I explained, there were revised plans submitted that now retain the playground, but there would still be a loss of the beer garden. As I showed on the site plan, the northern part of the pub does already have would be retained, as in the beer garden in the northern part would be retained, so the pub would still have a fairly substantial beer garden. So in that sense, considered the loss of the eastern section of the beer garden would not put the harm the long-term viability of the pub. And it's unlikely that there be significant deterioration in visitor numbers, and there's still be sufficient outdoor space for parking. In terms of flood risk and drainage, as I said, the dwelling itself is outside of any flood risk areas, so both in flood zone 1 and also outside of any areas that sort of flood risk. All the parking spaces are not. So everything we're talking about here is specifically only about parking spaces. So the parking spaces are in flood zone 3, which is the flood zone of highest risk. There have been many comments on the application that the road regularly floods, and based on the mapping, that seems highly likely that it does flood very regularly. As I explained before, the dwelling itself is sited above but the parking spaces aren't. This shows you some of the flood mapping, so I've drawn a red dot where the dwelling would be. As you can see, the vast majority of the area in front to the south is at risk. I'm going to show you some more plans, like zoomed out, of the flood zone in the wider village and the wider highway network. So this one here is the flood zones. So everything you see here, flood zone 2 and 3. And to remind members, that's where the sequential test would apply. That's where there's a presumption kind of against residential development in these areas. As you can see, it covers an absolutely vast area in this location, and the entire village essentially is at risk. This one here shows you the surface water flooding, which is again also applies to the sequential test, and that also vast amounts of area. So it's an area of the part of the county that does have a lot of flooding issues. In this case, whether the siting of parking spaces in flood zone 3 is contrary to national policy, there's some commentary in the officer report about that. I think our view would be that the position should be that parking spaces should not be located in flood zones. However, in this case, primarily due to the fact that the parking spaces are existing parking spaces that are already in use with the pub, and the proposal is to essentially allocate these existing parking spaces from use for the pub to use for these dwellings. And that's a material consideration in this case. The sequential test makes reference to having strong reason for refusals. Sorry, not special, that's the tilt balance. First, a strong reason for refusal. So just, I think it's helpful if I just explain that a little bit for members. One of the, so the NPPF suggested in footnote 7, in relation to paragraph 11, that the policies on areas at risk of flooding or coastal change, so that would include sequential tests and other national flood policy, could represent a strong reason for refusal, which would then essentially negate the tilt balance. Slightly complicated, I can go into more detail if people are confused. But our view is that due to that material consideration that the parking spaces already exist and are simply being proposed to be allocated to the dwelling, that wouldn't be triggered, as in they would not rise to the level of a strong reason for refusal. And therefore, in our view, the tilt balance would still apply to the application. Main policy in regard to design is policy EQ2. In our view, the dwelling would be well designed and is in keeping with the character of the village, which is almost all the dwellings in the village are stone detached 2-story dwellings. I think this would be seen in that context and would be not be out of character location. I think we're just to repeat the point where when we first submitted the original plan showed the dwelling sited slightly further forward, close to the highway. And I think there would have been an issue there with the fact that the dwelling might have been seen as being out of the building line. But with the revised plans, we consider them to be acceptable and to have resolved that issue. So the plan dash to illustrate that. Finally, on planning balance, to repeat this is the proposals for the provision of a dwelling in a sustainable location with 2 key services in compliance with policy SS2, which is going to submit planning balance in the context of a significant housing land supply shortfall. The tilt balance is engaged. Although the parking spaces would be in flood zone 3, we consider this does not represent a strong reason for refusal that would negate the tilt balance in this case, and that the benefits significantly demonstrably outweigh, but the adverse impacts significantly demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Sorry. Yeah, and that's the recommendation. So the recommendation is that the planning permission be granted subject to the conditions at the end of the report. Maybe I'll just make a quick mention on one of those conditions. There was some conditions that are slightly unusual. So one is about the ensuring the noise mitigation measures. So that's to ensure that any occupants would be their immediately wouldn't be harmed with any activities in the pub. So that's the conditions. Condition 5. And the report submitted by that was very detailed in that regard. So but we would require them to submit a revised one just to make sure that there's nothing further they can do on that. And then on the parking spaces, so there was that issue I said about how there was a strip of the parking spaces that are actually technically highway land. So therefore, we had some discussions with Highway Office about it, and they've recommended that the applicant go through a procedure that in the section 247 of the Town and Country Planning Act to essentially remove highway rights for that bit of land. The implication of it is that if, for example, they don't go through that process and it remains highway land, in theory that those parking spaces are partly on highway land, and therefore, in theory, the highway authority could want to do something different with that land, for example, put a pavement or what have you. So therefore, the parking spaces are not fully the dwellings to use as they see fit. And so therefore, that condition is necessary to ensure that those parking spaces will be available for use by those occupants in the house. Highway also have no concern in terms of the safety of the site or the ability of people to park in with persons. Noted it's an existing parking spaces and they haven't been issued at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there are no members of the public who wish to speak on this application, so we move straight to Councillor Hawkins, please, Steve Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to speak. We have a serious flooding problem in Pollymore. On 9th of May 2023, this road was under 2 foot of water. The pub was within 2 inches of flooding itself. We are in the process of negotiating with Highways England and the Drainage Board and the SRA all about the bringing gear. The burn that goes Parkbrook, what I'm trying to get at, which takes the water away from the road. When this flooded on the 9th of May, it was under three weeks, it was underwater. There was no access to the pub. There was no access to the village. I cannot see any consultation where the planning officer has actually talked to the IDB, the SRA, or the flooding people, or Highways England, who have just turned the road into a dual carriageway and increased the flooding. I would like this to be, if it's not turned down, to be brought back, having had a proper consultation with the flooding authorities, so that we can actually ask the question of Highways England, who have turned, as you know, the 303 in this area into a dual carriageway and increased the flooding through the village. It is important that we actually get this right, otherwise the family's going to be cut off for anything up between 2 and 3 weeks. And I mean cut off, I don't mean they're going to have to go in Land Rovers to get to their parking spaces. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So we move on to the agent, Jenna Lay. Can
I speak to the villager, excuse me?
I'm afraid you need to have submitted before
I know that, but I've just come back from away and I've just got to the meeting this afternoon. I mean, I did right opposite the property you're talking about.
I will give you a couple of minutes, but in future, I do need you to register. If you'd like to come to the microphone.
And the agent is online.
If you could, for the rest of the minutes, if you could just start with your name. So
Yeah, my name is Mr. David Llewellyn. My name is Mr. David Llewellyn. I've lived in the village for 47 years. I am in the property that is right adjacent to the proposed building that you're talking about. There's several issues here which the planning officer hasn't said to the committee. And one is the chamber that they intend to connect their sewer connection into, which is in the driveway of the pub next door to the property, is only 300 below ground level. And me being there for all these years, at least 2 to 3 times a year, the pub have to drain the rods into the pub because it gets blocked. So I don't see how that they can connect a new 4-bedroom house sewer into a chamber that is only a foot below ground level. Why I know about this, because I've been in the construction industry ever since I left school. So, and the other problem is the trees upon the proposed site. There's a huge beech tree. I mean, a huge beech tree, which they say in the planning, they're not going to touch the trees. Well, this beech tree overhangs 50% of the property where they intend to put the house. There's also a huge stump of a tree that was cut down several years ago, a walnut tree, and the roots are all still in the ground, and that covers the front area of the property that are proposed. And the third thing I would like to say is where the car parks for these vehicles are proposed to be put is 3 more sections of car parking off the pub back from the bus shelter. When the floods come down the road, how are they going to get in their cars? Because you will have like a foot of water all around the vehicles and they won't be able to get in their cars. I know this because I've lived there all these years. Plus, the last thing I'd like to say, knowing about building and planning permissions, the ridge line shows level with the pub or the next door neighbours. For to maintain that level of the ridge, you would have to dig out the whole complete area of the plot, which is 4 foot above the road level, to maintain the height to be the same level as the other houses. If they build just ordinary footings up on top of a 4 foot high, where the area is, then the ridge level is going to be way above the existing ones.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. So we move to the agent period for Jenna Lai, who I believe is online.
Hi, can everyone hear?
Hang on a second, we're just going to try and get the volume turned up.
Hi, can everyone hear?
Yes, we can just about hear you.
Yeah, good afternoon, members. I speak on behalf of the applicant Red Oak Taverns Limited. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today in support of this planning application for a high-quality infill development comprising a single dwelling with a private garden on land adjacent to the Portmore Inn. Members will hopefully have time to read the briefing note circulated last week, which set out the merits of this well-evidenced scheme and highlight that no technical consultees have raised objections. This development would make a positive contribution to the council's 5-year housing land supply at a time when it can demonstrate only a 2.22-year supply. As a consequence, the tilted balance is engaged and the need for new housing is pressing. Concerns raised by the parish council and third party have been fully addressed through the submitted technical assessment and your officer's professional evaluation as summarized below. On the impact to the pub business, while the eastern beer garden will be released for the proposed dwelling, the main rear beer garden and children play area will be retained. Only 3 parking spaces will be lost, leaving the pub with generous parking. Your officer has confirmed that the pub will continue to benefit from sufficient area of beer garden and parking provision. There is therefore no adverse impact on the operation or long-term viability of the Portmore Inn. Turning to the flood risk, your officer is satisfied that the 3 allocated residential parking spaces, although lying within the flood zone 3, are acceptable as the dwelling itself is entirely within flood zone 1 and therefore at no risk of flooding. The spaces in question already exist and are used daily by pub customers. They are simply being reallocated but not newly created. To confirm compliance with relevant policies, flood risk assessment has been undertaken, confirming that parking constitutes a less vulnerable use, future occupants will remain safe, and flood risk will not be increased elsewhere, as no changes to ground level or servicing are proposed. It is also important to note that much of the local highway network and surrounding land within Portmore is similarly at high flood risk. Consequently, your officer has concluded that allocating these existing spaces to the new dwelling does not amount to a strong reason for refusal. The tilted balance therefore continues to apply. In conclusion, this proposal will deliver a high-quality home within a sustainable village location, making a meaningful contribution to the council's substantial year housing land supply shortfall. The application is fully supported by your officer recommendation for approval. We therefore respectfully invite members to support your officer's recommendation and grant permission today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we move over to questions or points of clarification on both the comments from the public, board members and the officer. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, the 247 agreement, is that what the highways agreement, is that settled, is that a condition on the planning application? Or is that settled before planning has been applied for?
Yes, it's a condition. I'll get the exact number.
It's a condition. Thanks. Yeah.
No.
Yes, Webb?
Yeah, just comment on that very point. It's called a stopping up order. When I've just done one with a domestic house down there, highways land, took 5 years. Took 5 years from the legal department of Somerset, and it has to go via various solicitors to the magistrates court. So I would advise the applicant, if this does pass, to get their finger out, because it takes a look at.
We stick to questions like that.
Yeah, right, but just thought I'd clarify the point.
Is there any other questions? No, if not, we'll move into the debate. Who would like to start off?
I know how much time Councillor Hobhouse has spent out there. It's within our ward. It floods for long periods of time, and it caused demonstrable harm to the people within that village. Not only that, it was going to take a large part of the car parking of the pub away. And as we all know, pubs are struggling extremely hard to survive, and it will lessen the viability of that pub. So I'm suggesting that we should turn this down because it would damage the village demonstrably with the no way of curing the flooding there. Thank you.
Councillor Webb?
Yeah, can I take an opposite view? Sorry about that. This appears to me to be a natural progression of the outbuilding of Bodymoor and any villages. They've all spread out like this over generations. And this is just an infill, frankly, into that scene. And I hear what's said about the flooding of the car park area, which doesn't affect this building. And I don't see we have any planning reasons to turn this down.
Thank you, Chair. I am also worried about the fact that we're losing pubs at an alarming rate in this country, and I am worried about the viability of the pub. I'm glad to see the playground was moved back, and there was some efforts for the viability. The thing that really worries me is on page 147 within the parish council objections. It says, we've got the right one. It says that the pub landlord has resigned upon finding out this application. So the pub landlord obviously thinks there is going to be a viability impact on this. So I am concerned. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I just want to just check quick clarifications. The piece of land that's being potentially sold to build this property on, is that the ownership of the pub? But as I'm guessing, if we're talking about viability of the pub, I've seen many cases up and down the country where pubs are diversifying and gaining funding by signing off bits of land and different things to prop up businesses. So whilst I agree with some members that we need to support local businesses, this could potentially be a way of supporting that business by bringing revenue in by diversifying some of the land. Is that where we think we're coming from here?
The site is owned by the owner of the pub. I appreciate that the person who runs the pub might not be the owner, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Page and then Councillor.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that comment, looking at the details, the pub's owned by a bigger company, I think, based in West Sussex. So they're obviously going to cash in on this. I'm not too sure the money's going to help that particular pub. The second point is going back to councillor Hobhouse's request about consultation with relevant authorities who was flooding. He's obviously concerned there has to be proper consultation. So going to the planning officer, can you address this? Can you try and reassure me and maybe other members of the committee that there has been proper consultation and we really are fully aware of all the risks that are flooding? Thank you.
Yeah, so there's, I think, three consultees that Lady Rob mentioned were Highways England, LFA, and the Drainage Board. On the Drainage Board, they will comment on applications as they see fit, as in, even if we don't consult them, they want to comment, because I think they get like a spreadsheet in which they get consulted, they review everything, and then sort of pick out the ones they want to comment on. On the Highways England, you know, this side is quite distant from the A303, and I think Highways England would not want to be consulted on an application such as this, which doesn't have any impact on the A303 itself. And see how Garden might be wanting to contribute something. They also.
Darling's on London.
Well, I'll finish off my point. But then on the LFA, the reason for not consulting the LFA on this application, so in this case, you've got a proposed dwelling outside of the floodwatch area and only parking itself, existing parking space. In the context of the LFA, which they're not statutory consultees for minor applications, and they are extremely stretched. I mean, I think there's 3 people covering Royal Sunset, and you know, Sunset is absolutely filled with flooding issues. So, you know, we made that planning judgment, and it's not reasonable to require a written response from the LFA in this case.
Thank you. Adam, did you want to comment on the removal of the highways rights point?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Baker. It was just the comment about the length of time for removal of highway rights. I'm not sure, but perhaps Councillor Wade might be able to confirm which route his removal of highway rights was taken, because there are 2 methods of removing highway rights. One is under Section 116 of the Highways Act 1980, and yes, I would agree that that can be onerous in terms of process and timeframes and things. The other one is under Section 247 of the Town and Country Planning Act, and the sort of the guidance on that one is you use that route if it makes a development acceptable. And that would be the one in this case. So yes, the 116 route can be time consuming. The 247, in my experience, can be done far quicker.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you very much. Councillor Osborne and Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of points. One is about consistency, about what, an hour and a half ago, we approved an application for 4 houses where flooding was an issue, and went against national policy. So having done that, would it be consistent to turn this one down, or the same for flooding as well? Bearing in mind that there's no LLFA and no consultation from any statutory body or even the IDB. It's just a question, where would we stand on consistency, bearing in mind the only bit affected is the 3 parking spaces. In terms of...
Councillor, just on your first point, I don't think the operator is asking you to go against the other one, he's asking you to agree this.
Yeah, he's asking to agree, but I'm just questioning the consistency, we do not. Also, as well, was any sort of viability or evidence asked for? Because you're saying about losing the beer garden, but then how heavily used was the beer garden and how regularly? Because you could have a very large garden, so you've got lots and lots of space in between tables. And you may find you can probably put the same tables slightly closer in a smaller, more compact area. You know, it's not necessarily going to affect viability, and there's no evidence here that it would.
I don't know if everything's confused line, but I don't, you kind of answered your own question, I think, there. You started off on viability and then said moving the papers together makes it still viable. I just, do you want to?
No, it's just an observation, but did we, as you say, you're taking a chunk of land out from a property, part of it which was used to generate business or to accommodate customers, was any sort of viability evidence done as to what, I guess, the opportunity cost would be to the business of doing that if you remove a certain portion of the usable space? How would that impact on the business overall?
I guess that's a question for the applicant. If the applicant has decided to remove that piece of land from their business ownership to potentially property, so they would need to have decided if that would affect their own business. But it's not really a question. The officers would be able to answer because they wouldn't have the details of the business. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. This application is really in front of us because it is in a sustainable location. One of the reasons that it is in a sustainable location is because there is a viable pub in the village. But I am worried that this does affect the viability of the pub. Very alarmed to see that the landlord has resigned, and the landlord is certainly the person that looked at the business and knew what the bottom line was. If they've resigned, they obviously think it's going to affect the viability of the pub. So by passing this, are we effectively then putting a risk in place that means that we could then have no more development in this village because we've lost one of the assets? I am concerned about this, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think it's our job to worry about the viability of pub businesses run by companies. If they've judged that this is what they want to do and their manager didn't like it, well, that's entirely irrelevant. It's a small infill, it's a pub related floods, we should approve it. I propose we approve it.
I'll second.
Okay, before I take both the second, is there anyone else who wishes to make any further comments in the debate? Yes, Steve.
Just a comment, I thought it was a very good report.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's feeling it up there. Okay, if there's nothing further that anyone wishes to debate, I'll come back to the Councillor Stanton for his proposal.
Yeah, formally propose.
Councillor Webb.
Yeah, second as per the officer's report.
Okay, thank you. All those in favour of that proposal?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against?
8.
2, so there's 3 sides, 3 abstentions, 1. Okay, so that proposal is carried. We move on to the last part of the meeting there, which is the planning appeals, which you will see in your pack, which I'll be noting. Are you happy to note them?
Yes, I do. I won.
Okay.
So I think you want.
Yeah, hold on 1 second. My apologies. Oh yeah, my apologies. You were to receive a verbal update on a recent planning appeal.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. So this is just in relation to the appeal that you'll find in 3357931, land off Queen Street in Mandeville. So that was application 20/03613/4. So there was 30 dwellings with associated car parking, access and landscaping. So that was allowed, with the inspector particularly finding that while there was an impact on the listed building and harm to the character of the local area, and that on the whole, the application was contrary to the development plan. The tilted balance of the 5-year land supply meant that they felt the planning balance was in favour of development. It was granted with usual conditions.
Thank you very much for that. So I just want to ask everyone a question and take a quick vote on something which has nothing to do with planning after it's closed, just to gauge people's opinion on something. But thank you very much for today. It's been really good. And have a very good Christmas. I don't see you before. Thank you very much. Next meeting will fingers crossed be in January.